What came of the hairship?
Oh, have me tucht.
Agus Che and Tenham Horst.
John Shaw, no, as yn jawn dwi eisiau un siach ar y mwyn yn cwtioch. Da chwt.
Clíomh. Agus Colaisde how, agus catch the hook off.
Well, rwg mi as na station noon ysdio on the Baltimore. Agus chai ma hogal gydach an Cheshmi in the Dúchig an Ohio.
Okay.
Agus fa mi hwnnw sy'n gysna romi mach b'n giag.
Agus fel is like a chase swanning a hackets. Can you?
Chaned. Well, ha severla. Chanil swanju Gaelic agam. Ach saunas edin hini tua a hannig me hin sheen shenner.
Okay. Clíomh. And this Agus sound fair neck the hell Gàidhlig. What is your name?
John Shaw.
And where are you from, John?
I was born in Baltimore, Maryland in the U.S. And I was raised in Ohio, which is pretty much in the Midwest.
Okay. And can you tell us some of your genealogy?
Well, it depends on which side of the family. My father's people his father was Canadian and came from Ontario. They came from Northern Ireland at the time of the famine. Okay. That was my great-great-grandfather, Robert Shaw. And they said that their origins were Scottish. So it's very likely that they were brought in as planters in Northern Ireland. Okay. I don't think that they really had much when they came to Canada. My mother's side, the Scottish people, they were English and Scottish, and the Scottish people were from Dunoon in Argyll. And they had a business going between Dunoon and the West Indies. There were Scottish people in the West Indies. There were a lot of Scots, particularly from the West Coast, who set up in places like Jamaica. And these people were from St. Vincent in near South America, and they ran a shipping business between there and Dunoon.
Yes. Interesting.
Well, they had their stories.
I'm sure, yes. So, came the hoodoo elwas the Gaelic?
Well, va isn't Gléidheadh down the Gléidheadh, agus va Bhín de cointe san leabhairiscin agus charb í tuiscin mór an MacEachen ach bheith me farant in a grain diúmsa go bá sin a bhí mes na dúneaching fi Ionata. Agus bheith mi smúnacha gyda sin agus bheith cho dúlis gan sa féin amach go dé bechialt gan na granach. Sgro Gan droimi meach go bíoch gan, tíadach súla hors agus sin éin meach tíadach chofat sa chaiach a med. Agus bheith mehed a gobar sa rank on the 58. Agus bheith mi nóir sin me chéh me choig printíag. Agus chaimi a meach bheith stór mór leabhairicin ann, agus chaimi ann agus chur mi meach áirteag is an leabhar Gàidhlig éin. Agus hannig sin hócam, agus sé McLaren's Gaelic self-taught a bheith géad. Agus háist mi Europa iad, agus díadach a scríag amach na haberstins mar sin a rurst, agus sam mar sin a háist mi cuiú. Ach, dar a bheith mi me heach brindíag, huad mi bra is fer a bheith gobad is Gaelic as an dúis, an in Éileán Chanai. Ian Lahar na Caimble. Agus scríb mi leis de huiche, as a Gaelic, agus churaga nád ar am nis ha mi cíneach a leis sin einscin. Ach roi mi ísio coiú, agus chuid mi frecars as a Gaelic. Agus le fachgur roi mi amach, go a tors gansa fiachug na cuidig, agus a go a cáris ris fat an taunri. Agus san Éileán. Agus chaimi ann, agus bheith Gaelic ag go chula neachchanna sin. Gléidheadh na Gléidheadh, bheit becin na behinne na mise, ach bheit baial agus fine cuppas cóidú, bheit balle ach gan sin, bheit crogs cúdis sa leid. Agus chud mi ewas ar a sin. Agus bheit mi cóidis na Gléidheadh, agus bheit sita cílacha gan gó mi chafór chuda sin a bheit dó sa Gàidhlig eithir sin as ág. Agus nóir sin thug mi becin heachta dain an a núiste jés agus an a barai. Agus is dúi sin bheit nátar de Gàidhlig agam. Charm mi bulach fillanta sa chan an ítir. Ach roi mi táiseach iad sin.
Sin táiseach ag bheith, sin?
Well, rhain a grach I námsin go you.
Sin dúine Gléidhidh cútarach a bheith John Lorne.
Sé go deireadh, fer in na scoladin a bear a bheach an an láb an úr sin. Agus bheit óvas hain fiawi, a hain sa bhein. Bhí a curthúcam leabhrí sin sa léid, na híl mi ar nascan na stáchtin.
And this just a bear, I was asking, how were you introduced to Gaelic?
Mostly it was through reading because there was no other way when I was a kid, but it was one of these things that we knew that there had been Gaelic spoken. There was some kind of Gaelic in the family, but although we were so far removed from it that we didn't know who. But there was that background, and it was so difficult to find out anything about Gaelic that I thought there must be something there.
Yes.
So I began looking in books and so on, and we were staying in France in the late 50s, and my father was working there, and I went to one of the big French bookstores that get in books from all around the world, and they sent out an order, and I got a Gaelic book called McLaren's Gaelic Self-Taught, and I worked through the exercises there, and I got really interested at that point because the language was so different from other languages.
Yes.
And so I was trying to read Gaelic and getting books, and I heard about a man called John Lorne Campbell, who was the Laird of Canna, which is an island to the south of Skye. Right. And I wrote him a letter in Gaelic, which would be an embarrassment to look at now. But I got a letter back, and after I'd used the dictionary a few times, I was able to make out that he was sending me an invitation to stay with him on the island. So I went.
Wow.
It was an adventure. I was 17 at the time.
What a break.
And he had a farm there, stock and so on. And the boys working on the farm were all Gaelic. They were local and all Gaelic speaking. So I spent a lot of time working on the farm with them and picking up Gaelic. And they had all kinds of funny sayings and so on in Gaelic. So that's how I spent a little time in South Uist, a few weeks, and Barra. And by the time I returned home, I could speak some kind of Gaelic, although it wasn't perfect and it wasn't very fluent. But that was the start.
Oh, a great start. And John Lorne Campbell was quite an individual. He was a very important figure in the...
He was one of the best Gaelic scholars of his generation, and he was also very concerned about social conditions in the Highlands. He was a real crusader that way. He was watching out for Gaelic speakers there. For me, he was a great example in a lot of ways, and he was a good friend. He was generous. He'd send me books after I returned to the States, things that he knew I'd be interested in. Yeah. So in his own way, he was an excellent teacher.
Oh, I guess. And by that time, he had done quite a few recordings.
That's right. He made a lot of recordings in the 30s.
Yes.
And
black cylinder type recordings, I understand. Originally.
Yeah. I think he started with wire recordings.
Oh, wire.
Yeah. Wow. But he was always very enthusiastic about technology.
Yeah.
And so he made some pioneering recordings. which we have now. A lot of them are online in Scotland, accessible to anyone.
Yes.
And I was able to meet some of the singers and storytellers that he recorded in South Uist Barra. And I certainly had a great time getting to know them. And that kind of I began to like being around those people. They were a lot of fun, very nice.
Good. Agus fuach a seo an Glendale agus fearan na cuair sa bheith bring Gaelic agus sé an Gaelic. You lived in Glendale for a number of years nearby here in Cape Breton, and there were neighbours who spoke Gaelic and sang a lot of songs in Gaelic over there. So can you tell us a bit about that? When you moved here and your journey in Gaelic, where it took off from there?
Well, it was an education, we'll put it that way.
Yes.
I landed at the Gléidheadh house in Glendale in 1963.
Okay.
And all I had with me was a small suitcase. And Father John Angus Rankin had the parish at the time. And this opened my eyes in a lot of ways. It was a poor parish. It must have been something like 80 to 90% Gaelic speaking at the time. It's changed enormously since then.
Yes.
But it was mostly woods workers, and they just people started working at the mill. And Father John Angus, he had a farm there. It was horses. So I learned to harness the horses, and we spent a lot of time making hay, and I met all the families around, and I had a little tape recorder, a little Philips tape recorder. So we work all day with Father John Angus, and that farm was almost entirely Gaelic speaking at the time. The dialect, they spoke a Lochaber dialect, which is different from what I was used to hearing.
Yes.
But I learned that as quickly as I could because I had to.
Yes.
But they spoke excellent Gaelic.
Oh yes.
And in the evenings, I'd go out with the tape recorder, and I'd just walk to the houses around in Glendale.
McKay's and MacDonald's.
There were Boyds there. There were McGuinness's on the mountain road. I spent a lot of time going to see Johnny Williams, who was a great singer. He and his brother Neil. Johnny gave me lots of songs. And I began learning them and singing them at the parish concerts. I don't know what Johnny thought of that, but again, I did the best I could. And I also woke up to fiddle music. Bill Lamy was a great friend of Father John Angus, and he used to come by. And I listened to this guy play, and I thought, there's nothing like this. They made sure that I was able to sit in on, all the sessions and all the songs and so on. Nothing was ever said, but they just made sure I was there.
Yeah.
And looking back on it again, it was about as generous as you could hope a place could be. So that was Glendale, and they had the dances, and I'd go around the parish learning songs and go down to see Peter MacEachen, Patrick Sheena. I recorded stories from him as far back as 1963.
Right.
And I started trying to transcribe them, which takes a lot of work. Again, I'd be embarrassed to see the transcriptions that I started out with, but what can you say?
That's right, you're going to start somewhere.
That's right. Open wa táiseach.
Yeah, Patrick is a distant relative of mine too.
Is he?
Yes.
Through Glencoe or?
Through the O'Hanleys, I believe.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's right, he was related to the O'Hanleys.
Isabel was his connection to the O'Hanleys, I believe. Isabel.
Yeah. Isabel was his mother.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she was connected to my great-grandmother,
Yeah.
Christy O'Hanley,
Yeah.
who was Grandma's mother. Isabel.
That's right. They were South Hewes people.
Yeah. And my grandmother was called Isabel after Patrick's
Mother. Yeah. Yeah. She lived to be close to 100.
Oh, yeah.
Belak is what they used to call her locally.
Yes, I often heard that.
And after, in the 70s, I spent quite a bit of time recording Patrick.
Oh, yes.
And in the 80s. And actually, after 2000, when we were living in Scotland, I'd come back and he'd be one of the first people I'd head for. Yes. Because he always had something interesting.
I know. And stories from the Shaldowie.
That's right.
Yeah,
he was one of the best.
Yeah.
And he had stories that nobody else had.
Yes.
But nobody else here. But they were known back in Scotland.
Right.
So highly unusual storyteller.
So I'd like to talk to you now about your educational journey. Can you tell us a bit about that? Where you went to school and high school and university?
Okay. I went to school in Ohio, and then first year of high school, grade 9, I spent in France with my family. That was all through French, and it was very confusing at the beginning, but got through that. Came back, finished high school, graduated, and then I went off to university in the Boston area. And I was there for a 4-year program. Did linguistics and Germanic languages. And after I graduated, I was able to go back to France and study linguistics and Celtic studies for a year in France. Came back, did 3 years again in the Boston area. And then they sent me to Dublin. And I spent a year in Dublin doing Celtic studies. And I was going to write my PhD thesis, but with one thing and another, let's see, that was in about 70. With one thing and another, that got delayed until about 1982.
Oh, okay.
So, and I'm not sorry.
No.
So that was my education. I finally wound up the PhD in 1982, doing a study of a storyteller here in Cape Breton, Joe Neil McNeil, Eusnilvik. And then I got the PhD. I'd been working here at the time for 5 years on the Gaelic Folklore Project. So that's my education. But I recorded with Joe Neil for let's see, probably 10 years.
Really?
Yeah. He never ran out.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. He was like a well.
Yes.
You empty it at night, and in the morning it's filled up again. Yeah, he had an amazing memory.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time with him. His Gaelic was so good that, it was just a pleasure to listen to it.
Yes. And that book was called Sciel Gwa.
Sciel Gwa.
Tales Until Dawn.
That's right.
The World of a Cape Breton Gaelic Storyteller.
Yeah. And Joe, I spent a lot of time tracing down his stories, see what the history of them was, looking at the catalogues at the School of Scottish Studies in Edinburgh to see what had been collected in places like Euston Barra and on the mainland. Just seeing what came over here and what form it took and so on.
So you made connections between the stories he was telling and...
That's right.
What you found.
Yeah, and even some stories that you find in manuscripts. There was one story he had that went back to a story in a medieval manuscript. maybe from the 13th century.
Yes. Wow. It's amazing to think that that was handed down so many times through the generations, and he still.
Yes, and in some cases so accurately.
Oh yes.
It shows the persistence of memory.
Oh gosh.
And when you think about it, the dedication of people who listened, learned the stories, and told them again.
Yes.
These stories for a lot of people were precious.
Yes. And they wanted to get them right. They were
That's right.
compelled to get them right, exactly verbatim if they could.
That's right. Well, with Joe, if you deviated from the line, you get corrected pretty quickly.
Yes. Yeah. And that was a great help.
It was. Well,
for learning.
Yeah, that was the way people taught.
Yeah. So that was an interesting journey, and you're currently working with the University of Edinburgh.
That's right.
So you're following that same path that you took years ago, and continuing that same.
That's right. Well, I retired in 2009.
Okay.
And I've been there as an honorary fellow since then.
That's right.
Which is it's a very good situation because I get access to everything, the library and and office space and what have you.
So
they've been very generous. What?
Do you play an advisory role?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
I edit the journal,
right.
Scottish Studies, and once in a while, when they ask, I'll give a lecture.
Good.
But we've been dealing with oral Scottish traditions mostly,
Right.
and they've got a wonderful archive there.
Mm-hmm.
We spent a lot of time putting these archives up online.
Yes.
Since it was the public that gave them the material in the first place. These reciters or singers in Gaelic and also in Scots. They really belong to everybody.
Yes.
And technology has made it possible now for it to go back into the communities that have retained and passed these things on.
Yes, and that's so beneficial to learners today.
It is, and they also they use these materials, especially from the site Colaisde Riches or Topin Dúlchas. They use these materials in the school programs in Scotland now. Scotland's educational mandate is separate from that of the rest of the United Kingdom, so they're boosting the amount of Scottish content in the curriculum for children, which is no bad thing.
I guess not. That's a wonderful thing. While you were working at the University of Edinburgh, you were a Gaelic development officer at one time?
I was a Gaelic development officer, but that was not at the university.
Oh, okay. What was your title at the university?
Senior lecturer.
Senior lecturer.
In Scottish ethnology.
Okay. So as development officer, that was another.
I was working for Cumann na Gàidhlig in Inverness in the early 90s.
Okay.
And I was seconded to HIE, which was the funding agency.
Yes.
For the Highlands and Islands.
Yes.
And my job as Gaelic Development Officer was to make sure that there was adequate provision for Gaelic projects, Gaelic language and culture projects throughout that area. So that involved meeting quite a few people, visiting communities, travel, planning, and so on. We filled out a lot of applications.
I'm sure. Yeah, good experience.
It was.
Great.
It was a very effective way of learning how money works in funding agencies, which I was always interested in because we were trying to get money into here, into Cape Breton for Gaelic for years with our co-op, Cape Gael.
Yes.
And so we were talking to people in Ottawa and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And this really rounded out some of the questions that were in my mind about how this works.
Okay, so you mentioned Cape Gale. That was an associate co-op.
That's right.
Venture that you were involved in.
That's right.
Can you tell us about that a bit?
Well, it was four of us.
Mm-hmm.
Myself, Jim Watson, Donald McGillivray, and Ellison Robertson.
Okay.
And this was a co-op whose mission was to promote Gaelic culture in Cape Breton.
Okay.
So we were concerned with local Gaelic culture, promoting local forms of singing, local storytelling, language, and that much more than we were interested in promoting the monster of Loch Ness. That was our concept of Gaelic. What you found on the ground right here.
Yes.
So we did this by we took a show to Vancouver in Expo '86,
Mm-hmm.
and then another one to the Vancouver Folk Festival, which was all Gaelic artists.
Right.
The best singers we could find, fiddlers,
Mm-hmm.
piano, dancers, and just introduced the public right across Canada to a community version of Gaelic, rather than just a commercial version of something like Gaelic.
Okay. So what year would that have been?
86 and 87.
86 and 87.
So we had wonderful fiddlers. Alec Francis McKay was with us, Jim Morris Rankin, Natalie McMaster, Dave McIsaac.
Mm-hmm.
It was a great bunch of people.
I guess.
And we put on something like 33 concerts.
Oh, Lord. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Wow.
We worked all the time.
I guess. You worked on the folklore project from 1977 to 1982.
Yeah, that's correct.
So, can you tell us a bit about what that was like and how you got involved in it, and some stories about experiences you had, and even the equipment you used? I'd like to hear something about that.
I started out working here in Cape Breton in Sydney for the College of Cape Breton. And this was supposed to be an academic position, but because of circumstances, it began to turn into a public relations position.
Okay.
And so I ended up working for continuing education. I decided that from the situation that I could see at that end of Cape Breton, which is really not different from the rest of the island, you had two groups of people. You had people who were fluent and wanted to work on like reading skills and so on, which they didn't get in school. And then you had people who wanted to learn to speak the language. So I ran two classes. And for the fluent people, I began going out in the field and recording songs, stories, and so on, and transcribing them, so that when they read Gaelic, they read their own culture.
Yes.
And a lot of them were familiar with it, so it made it easier for them to learn to read. And for the beginners, I made up lessons that were based on local culture. Just bringing in expressions and words and so on. And so I spent a year there, then a year back in England, but in the meantime, I'd talk to a person who was certainly well known to my generation here by the name of Allan J. MacEachen.
Uh-huh.
And Allan J. and had a conversation, and we had a conversation, and he asked me pretty much point blank, as he often did, what I thought should be done about Gaelic here. Yeah. And I told him, we need a resource. We need a real resource for this that we can draw on. And he said, how do we get this? And I said, we need somebody out collecting full time in the field with decent equipment. Mm-hmm. And he said, all right, I'll see what I can do, which is another phrase he used very often. Yes. And he did. And we were able to set up a 5-year project with money from multiculturalism. And there was an office at the time which promoted smaller cultures within Canada, within the mosaic of Canada. Mm-hmm. And so that was, the funding was there, and we set it up through St. FX. And I went out and collected full time for 5 years, all over the island. We were living in Kingsville at the time, and I put myself on a schedule, which meant going out. I made myself go out and collect in the field 3 days a week. Okay. The 4th day I spent on administration of the project, mostly financial stuff, correspondence, that kind of things. And then the 5th day I spent on publications. And at that time I started putting together the book for Joe Neil McNeil, transcribing his stories, because I knew the man was special. Yes. And it was a real experience. I collected some things from people all around Mabou, the North Shore, Christmas Island, around Waikagama, Neil the King McKinnon, and these people. Had got to know them and became friendly with a lot of them. So it was a social visit as well. I used to go down to Myra to see Lochie Gillis, and he'd take me out to see people that he knew, which I would never have found but for him. And so 2 old MacArthur brothers who lived at the end of Myra, who had songs that I had not recorded anywhere else. This was the kind of thing that happened. So it was a very active life. Yes. We also had some animals, and a garden and all that, so we were quite active. Yes. And I'd bring back the tapes every week. We'd copy them off and we'd put them into an archive. And we also had to catalog them. So there was a lot of work. I think we ended up, after 5 years, we ended up with just short 1968 or something items in that collection. They were all recorded on a good recorder, a Ewer recorder, so the fidelity was high. I tried to make the recordings good enough to publish, to put on this. Well, they didn't have CDs in those days, but to put on a record. Mm-hmm.
Was it cassettes?
No, it was reel to reel.
Reel to reel.
Yeah. Okay. So those are still there. They've been digitized. Yes. And maybe someday some more of them can come out on a CD. Mm-hmm. But there you have the old style of singing.
Yes, beautiful.
There's a lot to it.
It's tremendous, really.
Getting people like Malcolm Angus MacLeod on the North Shore, who had just a wonderful voice. Yes. I always wished I could sing like him, and I didn't come anywhere close. Johnny Williams.
Right. John Alec MacEachen.
John Alec MacEachen. John Dan McNeil, Ian McGowan in Broad Cove, Lochy McClellan,
Yes.
who gave me scores of songs.
Right.
Lochy was he was quite a guy who had spent a lot of time working in the woods and so on, but he knew the Broad Cove songs backwards and forwards, and he also knew what they meant. He knew a lot of the history behind them.
Oh, yes.
So I spent years going to see Lochy.
There's some hidden messages in these songs too.
Yeah, there are. I remember Lochy. Whenever I had the time, I'd drive up to Broad Cove to see him because I got such a lift out of being with him.
Yeah.
And one day, he was. I suppose it's all right to tell this. He was on his porch. It was a Saturday.
Uh-huh.
He was working as a carpenter, so he was taking the day off. He was in the rocking chair, and there was a chair beside him. So I pulled into the driveway, and he had a bottle of rum beside him, and he was just watching the traffic go by.
Uh-huh.
So I brought a bottle and sat down beside him, and we were talking about this and that, and watching the traffic go by. And Lochy finished his bottle of rum, and he put the bottle down, and there was this long silence, and I knew something was coming. And he said, "You know, John, the only way to get through the whole goddamn thing is don't panic." I always remembered that.
Oh, that's stupid. Now, did he say that in Gaelic or?
No, he said it in English.
He did?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, he was quite the storyteller.
He was very good.
Yeah.
Very good. And he had a lot of witty sayings in Gaelic.
Oh, yes.
He described somebody who came into the place, young guy, who was had a real skiff on and was kind of parading around the kitchen and so on, and not entirely happy. And after he left the kitchen, Lochy said, "Ha shit cultly root a hoochig verniet." That looks like something that just fell out of the nest. So you'd hear these things all the time.
Oh, my God, yes. Yeah. Isn't that funny? Yeah, there was so many people around at that time. It must have been just a joy for you to meet them all.
It was.
In fact, I was at a house one day visiting when you arrived.
Yep.
To record Sandy William MacDonald.
Oh yes. Yep.
Yeah.
That was another person with interesting material.
Indeed. Yes. Yeah. Roots in Glencoe.
That's right. He was one of the few people from Glencoe left that had these stories and the songs and so on. Mm-hmm. And he was very forthcoming. Yeah. I had to visit a few times before he opened up, yeah. But very forthcoming, and a lot of interesting stuff about this carpenter character, a legendary carpenter character called Buppen Sood. Actually, one of the few stories of that kind that I collected in Inverness County. They had a lot down near Big Pond and Iona and so on, but very few of them here. But he had them. Yes,
yeah, I listened to his recordings on there, and
yeah,
I heard that.
Yeah,
but he had an interesting tone of voice too. It was similar to my father's tone of voice, and they were related.
Yeah, I think I think it was Jimmy McKay who was telling me, this is a long time ago, so I'm not sure I have it exactly right. But there was some family relationship between Sandy and Seamus of Argeny, who was I think a MacDonald. I think he was a MacDonald from Badenoch in Scotland, which is on the mainland. It's in the Central Highlands. I think Jimmy McKay mentioned that. So Sandy William may have been related in the Central Highlands as well, from settlers from there.
Yeah. So in English, what does the word MacEachen?
It means a person from Badenoch or Badenoch in Scotland.
And Sandy sang some songs?
I think he did, yeah.
And you interviewed quite a number of women too.
I did.
Elderly women, and they had some similar skill-working and
some they did. There was a woman from Lake Ainsley who was known as Ben Awastit Fetter, Peggy Smith.
Yes.
She was over 90.
Okay.
And she was in the home in Inverness. Mm-hmm. She was from East Lake Ainsley, from McCormick. Is there a place there?
Yeah, there were McCormicks in West.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the place was called McCormick.
Okay.
And if I remember correctly, she gave me some good stories. Mm-hmm. And then there were singers, some on the North Shore, and an exceptional one, Margaret MacLean in Boysdale, who some of her songs now are sung more and more by the younger people there. One of the ones that's being picked up now is Gawa Maroon's Gakan Kawa, which has a nice swing to it. But she had, again, she gave me scores of songs. I'd go around to see her, and she'd, after when I was working in Sydney, I'd go to see her. That's how it began. But when I realized what she had, I began to go back quite regularly. And she, at first she was a little reticent about singing, but I came back anyway. And when I came back, she gave me a pair of mittens that she'd made for me.
Oh, wow.
Which not only were they beautiful to look at, but they were double stitched.
Wow. So,
they really kept your hands warm.
Indeed, yes.
And I thought, well, that's a good sign.
She appreciated your interest.
She must have. I didn't know what was going on. Especially when I was young, the feeling I was going around and collecting these songs when I was, maybe 19 years old. I didn't know anybody really beginning, and I had a feeling, looking back on it, I didn't think I knew what I was doing, and I probably didn't. But I think some of the older people knew what I was doing.
Yes.
And
they saw the value.
Well, they kind of guided me in a lot of ways,
Oh, yes.
They taught me a lot about collecting.
Yes.
Without being technicians themselves, but how to handle it, socially especially.
Oh, yes.
And that it's important to know who's related to whom.
That's it. Yes. The unwritten rules.
That's right. That's right.
So that collection is available now online, and it's just a tremendous resource. And
well, I'm glad to hear it.
I'd like to take this opportunity right here to thank you for all the hard work you did on that, because we have this. It's just a bounty of information and recordings that we can listen to over and over again. It's just wonderful.
Well, thanks very much. And I've had the other recordings that I made early in the 60s and 70s, and also during the 90s and after 2000. Those have been digitized in Scotland, and I sent them over to Susan Cameron.
Oh, really?
I'm still cataloging some of them.
Good.
But so I'd like the people of Cape Breton to have everything that I recorded here, because it was simply the generosity of these Gaels that got these things recorded in the first place.
Yes. And they're so important to understanding the history.
Yeah, well, I can listen to these people for hours.
Yeah.
But you have the old singing styles coming down. People here are learning the singing styles simply by hearing them.
Mm-hmm.
We don't you don't really need to do anything else. Just sing it the old way,
Right.
Which is the way that's suited to the songs.
Yes.
And people understand that when you sing Gaelic, the words have to come out clearly, because the words are really the essence of the song.
Yes.
You can have the same air used for different songs, but it's what the song's about,
Right.
which is the important part.
And how do you feel about people improvising?
Well, they've always done that.
Yeah.
That's a natural part of
It's a
things.
natural part, okay. There were big years ago, though, the older people on keeping the exact traditional form.
You had to have the verses in order,
Yes.
and you had to have the rhyme work,
Right.
and you had to understand what the words meant.
Mm-hmm.
And if you didn't, usually nobody would call you on it when you were singing or in front of people.
Yes.
You just get one of the older people coming up quietly afterwards,
Mm-hmm.
and saying just in a low voice, "So this is the way it actually went," you know. and you wouldn't walk away forgetting that.
No. It was meant to make you learn that.
That's right. That was the way things were taught.
Right. So Gaelic songs have been a very important part of the language and the culture here in Nova Scotia. So I'd like to know how you feel about the compositions today, and if you feel we might need more people composing songs today.
I think the more the better.
Yeah.
The younger people, and the key to it is getting the skills for composing songs.
Mm-hmm.
And there are lots of examples there in the archive or in the songbooks.
Yeah.
So you can see how they fit together. You can see how in making a song, a person will bring out the proposition of what the song's about, whether it's a love song or a humorous song or a song praising the place. Look at something like She Gléidheadh and Gàidhlig, and just the descriptions there, or He mi vuam fata vuam, where he goes up the coast and he describes all these communities, and then he puts in a little remark about some of the people, the families that live there, and so on. But it's all in praise of the place, and people can start, where they want to. But I think one of the best places to start would be composing more humorous songs.
Mm-hmm.
Humorous songs about what's happening now. They used to compose songs about cars, that didn't work, or tea, people's addiction to tea or tobacco.
Right.
So,
the tea.
Yeah, that's it.
Negative computer.
Yeah. So there's lots to. I mean, there are all kinds of things like tea that are around now, or you could make up funny songs about mobile phones, about cell phones.
Yes.
There's all kinds of stuff out there to work with.
Yes, indeed. I remember a humorous song. I think it was in English though, about the party line, the phone telephone.
Yeah.
You probably heard that.
Spreads out like a grapevine. Is that the one? Yeah. There have been some cracker songs made up in English.
Yes.
About this, and which are pretty much on a Gaelic model,
Right.
so they could be made up in Gaelic as well.
Oh yeah. So we need to encourage more young people to be composers.
Oh yeah, I think it'd be nice if there was some get together sometime
It would.
where younger people came together and they just sang their compositions.
Yeah. There's a lot of violin tunes being composed.
Yeah,
but
which are important.
yes.
They're just as good. It's different because you don't need the language skills
Right.
to do. You need musical skills to do violin, and you need language skills to do song, and also the musical skills that go with song airs.
Yes, there's some of the tunes you can almost picture the lyrics to.
That's right. Yeah.
So that might be a good place for them to start. Listen to some tunes.
Yeah, and one thing that I've been particularly interested in is taking song airs, old Gaelic song airs, and turning them into slow airs for the violin.
Yes.
Huge potential there, because it's some of the most beautiful melodies that were ever made.
Oh, yes.
Are with Gaelic singers, and they're not being used for instrumental music. But if you have both an instrumental tradition and a singing tradition of a tune, it reinforces it.
Oh, yes. And the language sounds so much nicer when it's sung.
Gaelic's made for
language.
singing.
Yeah, it's a beautiful language. And it sounds great sung.
Yeah.
So, since we're on the topic of singing, can I have your thoughts on milling frolics?
They've always been a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many are going now because we don't live here anymore. But but it's a great way to learn to sing, and it's a great social occasion. And the way you really learn to sing is not by yourself; it's with other people.
Right.
It's picking up things from other people, learning with other people, and so on. I think that the social side of Gaelic culture is one of the most important things going here. And of course, it costs almost nothing. It's the price of making a cup of tea,
Right.
is all it amounts to. But you get so much out of it. So I think milling frolics are great. But what you need is people who really know the verses and know what the songs are about. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that we've been doing at the Gaelic workshops last week at Highland Village, Stáda Savala, working on these songs, explaining them to people, getting people to make up their own explanations in Gaelic so that they can understand more deeply what all of these songs, including the milling songs, are really about.
Can you tell us a bit about that singing experience that you've had yourself?
Well, I think what it really came down to was that in those days, back in the early 60s, I was one of the only younger people who was doing that. And I think there were a lot of people my age who would have been better, but they just weren't interested. And what I did enjoy doing was just bringing these songs back into the concerts as a younger person. I don't sing much these days since we left Cape Breton 20-some years ago. I haven't been singing as much, but I do enjoy when I'm back here getting together with people I used to sing with, right, and going through the songs. There's nothing quite like it. And also, frankly, the challenge of going up there in front of all these people and singing was a great way of learning songs. It put on the pressure so that you had to try to do a good job every time. So that was really my singing career. Yes. The parish concerts. Yeah. And since then, there are people who've come along who are far better than I was. But I did enjoy doing that then.
Yeah. I don't think a lot of the singers were expected to be great singers or perfect singers or anything in the Gaelic tradition. It was just the idea of singing and spreading that knowledge they had of singing.
That's right. And people used to sing all the time. The old people used to sing all the time.
Yes.
Even when they were alone, doing something.
Yeah. Everybody sang.
Yeah. You'd hear just the words coming out, and it passed the time.
While they were turning the separator for the milk.
That's right.
Or
and people used to sing when they were together and had 3-4 miles to walk together to a dancer. Before you knew it, you were there.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It was an important part.
Well, I'd like to. Of course, people drive around in cars now, but I'd like to see that practice come back.
Yeah. Yeah, it would certainly help.
Yeah.
In their learning.
Yeah.
Yes. And
sometimes they'd just go. You'd be sitting in a room, and they'd go around the room, and each person would sing a song, and that was a great thing too, because it made you think about it before you turned up.
Right.
You had to prepare something in your mind, which meant you knew it that much better.
Exactly. So, Guthan Allan J. What's your favorite Gaelic song?
Bishit a rééis go dé nóise haun.
Okay. Okay. Agus an gaháin in the dish.
Well, chun mis an suoige gáin na gáil an dras tíir. Sé chaine an gúach am chumá sa báis a bhí agus chaine lánach cin a chhlechci.
Could you recite a verse of a song in Gaelic too?
Well, I was just thinking of a verse that was kind of funny.
Okay.
From the North Shore. They had, there was a song, I think they knew it down in Iona as well. Machia Traums, Dullich Lium, Smoldach Marhami, von Hurt Melen and Corium, Cheur Chadesh na Haartje. About leaving his girlfriend. And they had this kind of saucy verse on the North Shore. An oitje ga mi Gléidheadh, gun de ganish mit an ater. Ga doek mi fuse na swifties goed, sound hook me at get the van head. And I thought that was funny.
Oh, I shouldn't blame her. Oh, that's good. So in English, for those that would like to know what that means.
This was a song about somebody leaving his girlfriend or his girlfriend leaving him.
On the North Shore.
On the North Shore. And I think the verse was made on the North Shore. It came from another John Shaw Shalgan, who was a fisherman there. And the night I went home with you, I found out what your true nature was like. I didn't even give you the sweeties I had. I handed them over to your mother. We'll
talk now about other work you've done. You worked on a project in PEI for a while.
That's right.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that was Cape Gale Associates that did that.
Okay.
We did that as a co-op.
Okay.
So it was those of us in the co-op who could speak Gaelic. And I've forgotten the exact title of the project, but it was something like A Cultural Remnant. Okay. And it was to collect the last vestiges of Gaelic culture in PEI. And PEI had been largely Gaelic speaking before, but the language disappeared there before it disappeared from Cape Breton.
Right.
So I did most of the recording, going from community to community, and a lot of what I recorded from people was in English about Gaelic, which is fine. But I did come across a man, John McLennan, who was, he'd been a lumberjack he was something like, he was 86 or 88 years old. He was in the home. He was not mobile anymore. A big, strong man who'd worked a lot in New Brunswick and Maine in the woods. And he spoke to perfect Gaelic. No problem. I think his people may have been part of the Skye settlement in the southern part of PEI. And so I spent a lot of time recording him. And I remember the nickname they had for him in the woods was Moose. Yeah, he's a great big guy.
Yeah. Strong.
Yes, strong and able. So he was, again, very generous. Recorded as often as I came to see him. I don't think he lived long after that, but he did a great job. We were collecting on the northern shore of PEI, and I was interested that there were very few traveling people from the Highlands who were in Cape Breton. In fact, I haven't found a record of any of them, although there were a lot of Gaelic-speaking travelers in Scotland. Still are a few. So I was wondering what happened with this, and just kind of keeping my eyes open. And one of the names that they had in Scotland for them, which is known this side of the Atlantic as well, instead of a traveling person, is Tinker. So we were up on the North Shore, and I was talking to people there, what had been a Gaelic-speaking community, and I thought I'll just throw this one out and see what happens. So I said, were there any Tinkers among your people here on this northern shore? And the lady thought a long time, and she said, "Oh yes, there were. There were some very thoughtful people."
So you've also done a lot of work in Scotland on the Pauline MacDonell collection. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, Pauline MacDonell was a good friend of one of my mentors, John Lord Campbell. And I also knew two of his brothers, Alistair, who was a doctor in South Uist, and Sorley, who's a famous poet. And Colin was Scotland's most prolific folklore collector. Almost everything that he recorded was from Gaels. And he worked in many parts of the Highlands, as you'll see in his book, The Highlands. But a lot of the outstanding work that he did in the Uists, in the Outer Hebrides, and in Barra. He collected, I think there's something like 400 songs that we have in the collection, but he collected many, many more stories. That was a big interest of his. And I had a chance to go to Dublin, where his written collections are stored, and saw what was written out. He recorded people on wax cylinders, and the Scottish universities wouldn't support this at the time. So it was the Irish Folklore Commission that hired him and sent him to record Scottish material in Scotland. And it wasn't until around 1950 that Scotland was persuaded that Gaelic culture was worthy of being recorded. So he'd record these wax cylinders, and then he'd transcribe them, and then he'd send them back to the Irish Folklore Commission, where they were shaved to save money and sent out again. So what we have mostly from Colin MacLean is written transcriptions and very, very few recorded voices now. But the written transcriptions come to some 13,000 pages. And I saw these things and I thought, this is wonderful material. People should have access to this. So we managed to get research money to digitize the written transcriptions and then to have them transcribed, typed out and transcribed, and put up on a website. So you can read the texts to the transcriptions, and you can then click and get the actual transcription that he did, an image of that, to check on it. So we've got those thousands of pages now of folklore, and that took 3 years. It wasn't easy, but we managed to do it. So Scotland has, that's just one more item of Scottish folklore that is available internationally. And there's another project at the same time called Topa the Nulhush, or the Kist of Riches. And this was digitizing the major folklore collections in Scotland, which was our collection at the School of Scottish Studies, John Lorne Campbell's collection from as far back as the 30s, and the BBC archives. And a lot of those, thousands of those recordings now are available online, and they're trying to get the rest online now. So
that'll be very valuable to learners.
I don't think there will be any collection online, folklore collection online, in the world that will be as large as that. And it's almost all Gaelic.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
Wow. So you're called upon to do a lot of presentations here and there in
I still try.
In Nova Scotia and Canada and other places in the world. So can you tell us a bit about that, where you've given lectures? I know you were here just last week here in Britain.
Status of Allah is it's a pretty informal session, and I just prepared some stories, most of which are not in Gale Stream. They're more recent. We thought we'd use new material.
So it's an annual event.
It's an annual event, and it's all in Gaelic, and so we had the sound clips of the storytellers, and then a transcription in PDF, so they could compare the two. And the idea was for them to learn the stories and tell them to me. That it's to build up storytelling skills. And a lot of the stories are pretty short. Some were comical. Some had to do with Colaisde, Bonnie Prince Charlie, the Gaelic traditions around that. Some, I guess there were some supernatural stories and so on. Pretty much what you'd hear at Noel-style gathering in the kitchen. Yeah. The rest of the presentations are mostly for academic conferences and so on, and it's what everybody does. The Gaelic, yeah. There's that. I do some folklore conferences in Europe. I've been involved lately in doing comparative mythology, looking at the ancient origins of a lot of these beliefs, trying to figure out what was happening in prehistoric times. But I work a lot with people in Ireland and with people in Scandinavia and Iceland. They're the most active people. I've been to Finland a few times doing presentations.
And have you lectured at Salmo Dostin?
I don't remember whether I have or not. I don't remember giving a presentation there. I did teach there once.
Okay, and Colaisde
back in the I did a presentation at Colaisde. I taught language at Salmo back in the 70s. But Colaisde for sure. And that was a privilege. It's been a great program there. It's bringing music and Gaelic together in a Gaelic environment. Right. So,
well, I was fortunate to sit in on one of your evening classes here in Port Hawkesbury.
Yeah.
In the 80s, in the late 80s.
Allan J.
So it was my first attempt at taking lessons to further my own Gaelic, and I was very fortunate. In fact, I confess that I use some of your material now that I'm teaching Gaelic.
Oh well, that's all right. That's for everyone.
Yes. So I'd like to talk now about the books and publications you've completed, and I know of at least 4 of them here: the Tales Until Dawn, the Blue Mountains, and other Gaelic stories from Cape Breton, Bree in Ireland, a story in every song, the songs and tales of Lochy McClellan, and you co-authored the book Gléidheadh.
Yeah.
So, can you tell us a bit about that experience?
Gléidheadh, it's Hector Campbell's Footprints.
Yes, great title.
It came from. He grew up behind Jude, in the rear of Gàidhlig, Hillsdale.
Yes.
And
they call that Ben Noah sometimes.
Ben Noah, that's right.
Now, where did that name come from?
I don't know.
I'd love to know.
Yeah. But he used to when he went down to get his mail in the mailbox in the winter. You see the tracks coming down and going back, and that was the trace of him. Yeah. That was what he left.
Yeah.
So we decided on that title.
Oh, that was great.
And that was the first publication from the Gaelic Folklore Project. Yeah. It was going to be Hector Campbell, just a short book, but we were lucky to get it published in Scotland. And then
that was Sister Margaret MacDonell that co-authored
we co-authored it.
Okay.
And because we both recorded from him.
Right.
I recorded from him in the early 60s. Okay. And then the second person that we wanted to produce a publication for that was Jo Neil McNeil, and I did that. And then the third was Lochy McClellan. So 2 storytellers and a singer. And then the Nabaltach Gorama is really a collection of various kinds of tales from Cape Breton storytellers. Right. And it started off as a book that wasn't meant to be an academic publication. It was just a book for the public. Yeah. And there was a complication having it come out with the original people that asked me to do it. So I contacted McGill Queen's University Press and didn't really think they'd be that interested, but they were. So they brought it out, and I was very happy about that. So
we're very lucky to have these books.
Well, as long as people enjoy them.
Oh my. Great resources. Indeed.
Jo Neil had some that I liked a lot. Chajian Cas Hidam Iasgach. You've probably heard that. You can't catch fish dry shod.
That's right.
You've got to go in and do it.
Yeah.
And Lochy McClellan had an expression about a person anyone who was extremely acquisitive wanted stuff all the time. Good you got topit. He'd steal a well on you.
That's a great one.
Yeah.
I've never heard that one before. Good.
And there was one that they used to say, some of these programs that they were putting up that weren't going anywhere. You've probably living here in Cape Breton, you've seen many of them. Chashes poch gefawov. An empty sack won't stand up.
Yes, it takes more than that.
Or if there's gossip going that there's nothing to it, and the object of the gossip is just letting it roll off their back. Hadishje a yawach na coin the Colaisde dia. The moon is none the worse for the dogs that bark at it.
Great.
So that every time I think of those in the situation, it cheers me up.
I know, and the thought process behind them.
Yeah.
That's what I'm.
Joe would have another one. When a person was using one thing as an excuse to do another, he'd say, "Gléidheadh an arang is le inyima." Eating the bread for the butter on it. What they really wanted was the butter.
Yes.
But they'd say they were eating bread.
I know. And that could be applied to so many
You bet.
life situations.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah. No, they're wonderful. And that's what makes Gaelic stand out, I think, amongst other languages.
Yeah. Well, when you hear those things, you see the situation and you hear some of the proverbs or expressions that go with it.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you think.
Oh, yes.
It makes you, you look at it from different angles and you learn from these things.
Oh, yes. And the wit and the humor was amazing. So you're going to share a story with us in Gaelic and give a little background on that story, if you can.
Kerst. Snubliel in the Gàidhlig tra Nidavami Karaog. Va een kretje Gléidheadh an Cheshmieng Sul na Gàidhlig. Agus Chubniel said Sakers agus Ninischiren. Agus va kushvor you shin a cortadium the persanta. Agus Shumig Teich gehoord mi vochba. Va the gen of fame as na Kairsnachen. Agus met a hacher aan Jumagach jelle. Va met a ganneget va da huub vul. Agus wie ik neerken bekke evin het om een goorst. Man Joey. Agus maar exemplar bruin men de sakkerst. Wie ik ver aan wishing aan get doen je wel ek wel geen eving. Wishing aan get G-spraden de triuur. Clown ewan doing. Agus va fer you dal. Wie gaat of een heuge toe agus een genif open op shit se shop. Maar de Guthan. Agus haru dagen je heen aan. Ach, hoe kan ik een oenje Colaisde en takkers aan de shudik? Agus waarom sinds Rotsenbie waar die enige she enige splutte konig agus blauwing agus stokker ook op het vier. Agus va grootje de dollarst gurei. Agus harushin de kuder dunje. Va dollar de goste watting. Agus jedische sakkerstonsje. Agus harke mag van doi. Agus va leed je gafake in takkers. Agus haru do tussen kutje wou niet het. Agus va goper machine agus hoorstje sakkerst va krogach agus hoorstje sakkerst well agoon. Kuda sorste nicht. Feme to na fensacha na Gàidhlig. Agus bheit dul smúdach go sin agus charú a fencing go sí an cear is na fensachan mar bhar. Ach smúla sé sin agus thuirste well Gléidheadh a bhfuil obair sin. Agus thuair sa sacrast, well ha an jespicatí. Agus thuig dul sa bhinneid go raibh talig an tagart go bíag cultas ma skibalta ar a chuaille sin tiimiisiúir an tuig. Agus smúna sé fa tachgan agus thuair sé an jespicatí na bheith. Bhí le donna go brísigh einsacha.
Gléidheadh.
Agus a brúine na ministeren bheit sean sé an a bedek. Agus as a fariste bhain, bheit fuach an na toie bheit immel, vier immel a fariste. Agus bheit nu sé 10 jaar. Agus charúi féim an gúirs go furas de íteir. Féimis gorói cattle san seabhar cúl mar a chana sat. Cúl stáv. Agus bhaine sin fat blial an a gá, agus go sé hachar, ach gandánig miniature á gúr, ys duig an a fariste. Agus fanna sé dunne díanna dach a bheits nerat, sa bhíinisteir. Bhí ga túl sa chúla túi. Agus há sé sé túb na heclaisiúg agus bheit dul amach as a sin. Agus friedig nach de ránica an túi sa ró a chailech. Agus hannig stois agus húgug sias gan a farla ra, in jabar súie, agus falt an a sin, agus bheit chailech bheit car jerisach leis a bháinní, agus bheit na seambar hain. Agus thuair sé miniseir, is jo a júne, thuair se. Nach éidir meir a fuach an seo cóirí. Well ha cóirí an drásta. Scarsa nach éidir an seo cóiríne. Chanéirí farin ma, hai carmíanach an á. Well, ferru stoi, sgan kunnig mi die. Agus, chai fisse chuir a chanig, agus, hannig I noos, le matje, charosin forestí, suis an chamber, agus van miniature al, agus, chuirse miniature die, wat va gro a tarische elwas a chorana, agus an oorsin, gro a nara hors, nach de nachgie an chervish, as an jeklish, ietjes. Agus hoorse chaljach wel, ha mi ons geen doelig mee een sin, ach, ha mi godonne je, leis a waan je, nach er voorus te ganse, koshach na jeich milken, jus in a heklusje. Agus, hoors, a minister wel, ha mi tukshin sin, ach, ik hier staan, kunnig, nach chervish aan een jidder. Agus hoorse a chaidech díadach as a vinnig. Wel, mar a hel, cha ná net halif cin vinisteren.
Oh, maar shit, ja, kom man. Lay there. So wat is dus dan veel technical Gaelic? En voor toe Isha, dan je kan zien in Amsterdam.
Oh, there was a family, Clownell and Doing, in Inverness County that who were known as being very witty, and a lot of their sayings and their remarks have been passed on over a few generations. And one of them, Donald, didn't seem to have any home of his own, so he was going from house to house and doing the various chores and so on, and he'd get a roof over his head for a while and meals, and it happened that he was staying with a priest in Gléidheadh. And he was doing the chores around there, the milking and taking care of the cattle and so on. And one morning the priest came out and he seemed as if he was kind of agitated, and Donald was working around and he said, hurry, Donald. You must go out and repair the fences. Mm-hmm. And Donald, who knew very well that the fences were in pretty good shape, couldn't figure this out, and he said, well, of course I will, Father, but is there a particular reason why I should repair the fences now this morning? Mm-hmm. And the priest said, the bishop's coming today. And Donald thought for a moment, and he understood then that the priest wanted everything to be looking neat and tidy around the glebe house for the arrival of the bishop. So he said to the priest, oh, the bishop's coming. Oh, I see. Is he bad for breaking fences? And the other one was about a minister. Mm-hmm. And there was an old lady that lived in a house which was just on the edge of the parish and kind of isolated. And she was bad with arthritis. So she was they put her in the back room behind the stove, as often happened. That was fine. She was content. But she didn't get around much. It was difficult for her. And they got a young, new minister in who was very conscientious and concerned with establishing himself. So he decided to go and visit every house in the parish. And he did, starting with the church, and then he went out from there. And finally, he reached this isolated, lonely little farm where the old woman was with a family. And they took him in and they took him to the parlor, and that was fine. And they were talking about this and that, and he'd heard somewhere that the old lady lived there, but she wasn't in the parlor. So he asked after, and they said, oh yeah, she's in the back room. She's not too well today. Arthritis is beginning to bother her. So the priest said, well, I'd certainly like to meet her. And so they went and they fetched her and they brought her down and to the sitting room, and she came in with her stick and she sat down, and they were talking about this and that, and the priest said, well, I've noticed that you haven't turned up at the services in the church. And she said, well, I'm terribly sorry about that. But unfortunately, it's with my arthritis, it's difficult to walk the 10 miles there and back. Mm-hmm. And the priest said, well, I understand that, but the important thing for you to remember is that there are no services in hell. And the old lady snapped right back and said, well, if there aren't, it's not for lack of ministers.
Pretty sharp, eh?
Yeah.
Pretty shallow, eh?
Shallow is right.
I'd like to talk now a bit about your thoughts on music and the Gaelic language and Gaelic expression through the music, and where you think that's heading.
To take it back to what I see as the basics, mm-hmm. I think that there are important links in almost all cultures between language and music. And in Gaelic, I think especially. And that's why you get stories in Gaelic tradition about speech coming through music. I think that Gaels hear things musically a certain way because of what they hear in language. It may be the sound contours in the language that determine some of the shapes of the Gaelic airs. Mm-hmm. It may be this point that I raised in print. Not everybody agrees with, but the old people, I got it from the old people who could speak Gaelic, that with Gaelic going from Cape Breton, non-Gaelic speaking fiddlers play differently. This may be because they hear differently. From what I've seen, talking again to older people who spent their lives speaking Gaelic and listening to Gaelic music, this seems to, the style seems to persist for a generation after the language is lost in a family. But after that, they say they hear a difference, and I think it's important that they do. So I think the music is changing. I know a lot of other people think that the fiddle music's changing too. There's some of the researchers who've looked at it have said that you get much more of a single, thinner sound with the fiddlers now than you got before. And if you listen to people like Alec Francis Mackay playing, there's all kinds of sounds going back and forth.
Yes.
When he's playing between the bow and what he does with the
Right.
fingers and so on. So I agree with that. I subscribe to it. And there have been some very good tunes made recently. Whether or not they're purely Gaelic tunes, I guess it doesn't matter to a lot of people, and that's fine. But if you're looking at a change in Gaelic tradition, the first thing I would ask is, how much are these tunes like the ones that were made by Dan Rory MacDonald? Or John Angus the Carpenter?
Oh, yeah.
And some of them are very, very like them.
Yeah.
So there's nothing rigid here.
Yeah.
But things do change.
Right.
And you can be very philosophical and sit back and say, well, we all know that things change, so, what's the big deal about? I'd say the big deal is the terms in which things change.
Yeah.
It's like currencies changing. It affects people.
Yeah.
And we all know that even if there are changes, it's important what kind of change it is, and who's affected by it, and where it's taking us. And I think there has been something happening with music. I think a lot of it's been good. I think, on the other hand, that in some cases, especially with the continuation of Gaelic styles in music, not all the opportunities have been taken advantage of. You get great stuff happening with piping now, traditional piping. Randall Mackenzie's boys, what they're doing with it, which I think is right on. Great stuff. And you get some of the younger fiddlers coming up who have, sat down and somehow made an effort to go back and pick up that old style. I think the more Gaelic they learn, the better they're going to get at it.
I heard a quote from somebody recently that the pauses in between the notes in the music are just as important.
Yeah.
As the notes.
Yeah. I'm sure that's right.
Yeah.
Of course, the main thing and what distinguishes Cape Breton fiddlers from the ones in Scotland by and large is the rhythm, the sense of rhythm, the swing.
Yes.
And one of the ways that I see that being brought out, I mean, if you watch Alec Francis play and watch his upbow, which very often is on the offbeat, boom, like that. It goes up on jigs he does it. And of course that just provides a tremendous rhythm to things. But you've got to know how to do the upbow.
Yes. There's a technique.
That's right.
That's learned and it's sometimes in the blood too.
Yeah.
It is.
Donald Angus Beaton was another great one for that.
Yes.
When he was doing reels,
Yes.
he pretty hard to beat.
Yeah. Wonderful musicians, all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we talked a lot about changes there that are happening, and over the years, can you comment any further on other changes that you may have seen in regards to Gaelic in Nova Scotia over the years?
Well, I think that the younger people are they're getting more confidence.
Yes.
With songs, and they're drawing on the older material that they would have thought was obsolete, ancient, prehistoric before, but they're beginning to see value in that because they like it, and they don't really care that much whether people on the outside like it or not, and that's very healthy, because what it means is community is coming out again. This is an assertion in an effective way of community here.
And there's some new rituals happening. Like, for instance, tonight, it's Monday evening, and now there seems to be a ritual for the young people to gather at the Red Shoe.
Oh, yeah.
Early in the evening for a jam session
of
sorts, before they all head for the square dance in Brook Village.
So that must be something.
That is, and it's such an interesting change that I have noticed coming.
Yeah, of course they'll be remembering these gatherings for the rest of their lives.
They will, indeed. And they're recorded, a lot of them. There's,
that's good.
Yeah. So that's some changes that have happened. The Kennedy report came out around 2001, and was pretty detailed on Gaelic.
It was.
In Nova Scotia. Can you comment on that report? And
just very briefly, but I read it, of course, and I knew Mike Kennedy fairly well. He was a student of mine when I was teaching at UPEI in the summer. And then he came over and did his degree at the University of Edinburgh. And I was his external examiner for his PhD thesis. And that was successful. I was glad that he got the job because I knew that he was very thorough and committed. And I think his report is it's the fundamental document so far for development of Gaelic in Nova Scotia. It's what you have to go back to when you have to determine what is so to know where to go from here. And of course, it's had a very high number of readings online.
Yes.
So I think it was just tremendously fortunate for Gaelic in Nova Scotia that Michael Kennedy did this, and that he produced what we have now.
And a great reference.
It's the best one.
Right. And I think that report was commissioned. Had been commissioned by Rodney MacDonald at the time in the government.
Possibly so. I don't remember the background to it that well.
So there's a type of sequel coming out. I believe there's people working on at the Highland Village now.
That's right.
That continue that.
There are three of us. There's a steering committee, and there are three of us working on the research end.
Okay, so yourself?
Yes, myself, Tiber Fawcett, and the economist Zenit Ugluk from St. FX.
Oh, good. Great. I'll be looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Final product. So there's been some ups and downs in over the years in Nova Scotia. Would you care to comment on that?
Well, I suppose I could spend the rest of the week on that. But what you have recently is, I think, a much more genuine interest in Gaelic, and I think that has come. It's come partly from Scotland, where people have begun to work through the institutions for Gaelic language and culture there, and you see people here looking and saying, "Well, why can't we have this too?"
And partnering.
And that partnerships are essential to this.
Yes.
I've been trying to persuade people to establish more of them here. But not only between here and Scotland, but between groups here in Nova Scotia working together on projects. I think there's more confidence in community Gaelic culture here, which is the key to the whole thing as far as I'm concerned. It's what I've always promoted since the 60s. And that's where it's going to grow, if it's going to grow anywhere. I think that things work much better here from the bottom up, with just direct work with people, than they work from the top down. We've had a lot of top down planning in Nova Scotia, coming from outside of Cape Breton, which had nothing to do with the real requirements of Gaels in communities here. Hopefully that's changing. You can see improvements. Highland Village, I think, has done pioneering work. I think the Gaelic College is beginning to do pioneering work too. So all of these signs are good. People are beginning to take the reins in their own hands, and that's the only thing that is going to promote real Gaelic culture here.
And take advantage too of all the talent that's out there and the knowledge. Yeah. That's sometimes hidden.
Yeah, that's true. Well, lack of opportunity is the real key. Yeah. I think it's good for young people from here to go over to Scotland and see what they have. Colaisde is a great place for that. But maybe spend a little time at Salmorostek. Spend a little time with a family, a Gaelic-speaking family in South Uist or Barra, and just get the feel of what things are like in Scotland, because it helps you see your own place more clearly.
Exactly. And everybody's part of the fabric, whether you're parking cars at the Bronco concert or whatever.
Yeah, that's right.
You have a part to play in the... So inclusion is important.
That's right. And I think people are becoming more aware of that.
I think so.
The Stara Savala session this year was great, because there were 15 people there, and everybody was working together on this material. It may have been informal, but it was concentrated, if you see what I mean. Everybody had a part to play. It was beautifully done.
Good. Nice to hear that. So what future do you see for Gaelic language and culture in Nova Scotia?
Same thing I've always said. Sky's the limit.
Why not?
What I think institutions don't realize, or they say they don't realize, is that all of these Gaelic services cost very, very little to put together. I spent a few years in the Highlands costing these things. And for the economic knock-ons and benefits that you get, and the social benefits and the mental benefits for people, maybe keeping people out of jails and out of the health service and so on, it's very, very little money. I think it's one of the main avenues to social health and to mental health. I think one of the reasons that the older people here were so strong in a lot of ways, and that the communities stayed together as long as they have under these adverse circumstances, was simply because of the strength of Gaelic culture. These people had come up through centuries of hardship, and they'd found whatever way it took to make it work for them. And it's something that I think is a principle that has to be carried forward. And there are still social and mental resources in Gaelic that have not been tapped. People's memory, what can be accomplished by communities singing and playing music together, the confidence that comes out of that, at a very, very low cost to the state.
So do you have some advice now for Gaelic learners of all ages down the road?
Yeah, hang out all you can with people who speak the language. Not only will you learn Gaelic, you'll probably have a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's good advice. And don't give up.
Oh, don't give up.
Yeah. It's worth the effort.
That's right. Síochan túd.
So, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share before we end the interview?
Simply that I'm very happy about some of the things that are happening here now.
Mm-hmm.
We never dreamed back, those of us who were involved in Gaelic back in the 70s, not to mention the early 60s, never dreamed that some of these things would happen. Never dreamed that there would be the programs at Highland Village. We never dreamed that there would be people in Mabu, in Glendale, in Iona, and so on, who were learning the local dialects and could speak them fluently, and have acquired songs or working on stories now. Never thought it would happen. I think that there's been a good foundation put down. A lot of it depends on younger people. A lot of it depends on women. Women may save us yet. So there's the beginnings of a foundation, and really what has to happen now is that this has to grow and strengthen, and people have to start organizing and speaking seriously to the provincial government and the federal government about not only about the responsibility that these governments have to communities, but about the benefits that can come out of Gaelic development, not only for the communities, but for the government itself.
Great. Well, I would like to thank you now on behalf of the Gaelic College for participating in this interview.